This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 420, Same Page Preview. On today's show, we're talking about Same Page Preview, why it's needed, and when it might be in Drupal Core, with our guest, Chris Weber. We'll also cover Type Tray as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Today, our guest is Chris Weber. He's a principal software engineer at The Nerdery, coming in live from the Twin Cities. He's been doing Drupal for seemingly forever. He loves brainstorming and working to keep his FOMO at bay. Chris, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here. Honored.
I'm John Picozzi, Solutions Architect at EPAM, and today my co-hosts are Mark Casillas, joining Drupal technical lead at Canopy Studios, joining us live from Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is surprisingly hard to spell, ladies and gentlemen. He plays ice hockey. He's in a band called the Randomatics, and Mark has been developing and maintaining Drupal sites for over 12 years. He's known as Marky on Drupal.org. Mark, welcome to the show, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, thank you very much for inviting me. This was a nice surprise. It's been a while since I've done a podcast or anything of that ilk, so I'm pretty excited.
Now, I'm gonna dig into something that I believe I know about you that might be helpful here to our listeners. You at one point were on radio, or were you not?
Yeah, I used to do the morning show here in Albuquerque on 94 Rock. I was the producer for the morning show. My initial degree was going to be broadcast communication, and my dad always said I had a face for radio and a voice for print. So that's how that career went. And I started in radio, and I was doing an ad for AOL way back when, and realized that developers actually get paid more than producers of a morning show do. So that's when I switched careers.
There you go. Well, we're elevating here, listeners, with people that have actually been in radio, because podcasts are kind of like radio for the internet. Yeah. Anyway, Moving right along. Last but not least, joining us as usual, Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
Good morning. Happy to be here. Looking forward to the topic.
Let's jump into our module of the week. And as usual, we're going to turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to present a better, more organized version of the content ad page on a Drupal site with a large number of content types? There's a module for that. It's called Type Tray, and it was created in March of 2021. It has a 1.2.4 version available, which works with Drupal 9.2 or newer and Drupal 10. And it is actively maintained. In fact, the most recent release was earlier this year. Now, it has only 8 open issues, and 3 of those are bugs, and 2 of those actually already have patches. And it does have test coverage as well. The module is currently in use by a little over 2,700 websites, and it was created by Marco Scano, who has a couple of co-maintainers, all 3 of whom appear to be from Lullabot. Now, the module allows a site builder to categorize the content types and then present those in a list or grid view. Each content type can be assigned a thumbnail and or icon to give content creators a visual idea of the options available to them, in addition to there being an extended description field for the content type. There is also an ability to assign a weight to each content type so that as a site builder, you have control over the order in which it will display within its category. Now, also note there is a Gin type tray module available to make the type tray look better when used with the Gin admin theme. And listeners may remember our discussion of the schema.org blueprints module back in episode, I think it was 366. That project includes a schema.org type tray module to provide its own type tray integration. So let's talk about type tray.
I think that's interesting. Is that available for other content types like paragraphs or blocks? Because I really love the way that layout is for it, but I was wondering if you could extend it to other entity types.
As far as I know, it works exclusively with node bundles, but I'm not sure. Maybe it could be extended to work with other kinds of entities as well.
I'm always interested by modules that help content editors and content creators do things better. And I feel like, especially if you have like a ton of content types on your site, that like the current Drupal content page is meh, it's all right. If you look at the kind of the visuals on this module page of what this module is able to achieve, it's actually pretty cool. It allows for, you can see that the thumbnails there that have kind of the layout options within that the page, shows you kind of exactly what you're going to get, or at least a little bit of what you're going to get. That's pretty cool, as well as the icons. I think that's pretty intuitive as well. So I'm all for better user interface.
Especially if you could take control over how each of those little snippets look like. I've seen different breakdowns of content types that basically shows like a screenshot of the intended result. I think that would be a good next step to take, like maybe make each of those snippets themable.
This is one of those little helpful, if it's a requirement for your client, it's one of those things that would be kind of a little annoying to create and do yourself. And so having a module that kind of does it, it sets up the structure for you is great. And even just the ability to sort them, I think, so they're not alphabetical is great. Because how often are there like content types that, like, most sites have, complex
Group
sites
and sort.
Yeah,
I
group
think
and
is,
sort. Yeah.
right.
There's just so many content types that you use only a couple of times a year, maybe, and then others you use daily, and being able to reorder that is nice.
Just thinking of something else that Martin is familiar with is the event platform, right? And just thinking of like a Drupal camp or an event website, right? So you have like your page creation pages, right, where you might have like a basic page and a more advanced page, right? But then you have like your session and camp related stuff, session speakers, that sort of thing. It could be interesting to kind of work through splitting those into different categories to make that a little bit easier. But anyway, there are probably a million uses for this module. Has anybody actually used this module like in the wild?
No.
Well,
Nope.
Curious.
The other thing I was just going to point out is that I think the way this adds sort of, icons and more of a visual reference to the overall experience, I think also kind of aligns with some of the changes that are being made within Core around adding, reusing fields or adding new field types and sort of making that a more visual experience. So I think it really helps to make the content ad page sort of align better with the overall direction that Core is moving in.
Do you know if the order of the menu updates based on what you update to? Because to be honest, I usually just use the add content menu fairly often. Although I don't know if I would want that to be non-alphabetical.
So now I'm trying to think, is that menu actually Drupal core, or does that come from the admin menu module?
That comes from admin toolbar. So
yeah.
I don't know if that would affect that. And I mean, you could actually in your configuration change the weight in the menu as well. So I don't know if that would be a thing that you could match up.
Yeah, I'm curious about that. Also, I just have to point out, I think the other nice thing that this does, I assume it does, I could be wrong, I guess. I think it makes the click target bigger for like choosing one, because you can easily target just one row, but like sometimes they're, a giant list of things. It's hard to target the right one, but spreading them out a little bit, if you can click on the icon instead, it's just that much easier to, choose what you're doing.
I would hope that the icon's clickable as well, because that would certainly help out. I also like that I'm assuming that these links of view existing article nodes means that it'll go to your content page and then just already filter out the existing articles.
Oh,
That's a
man.
really nice feature as well.
That's literally worth the price of admission right there. I sometimes struggle with the filtering on the content page, but that might just be a me hang up and not a everybody hang up. Alrighty. Well, Martin, as always, thank you for enlightening us to another wonderful module.
See you next week.
See you.
Alrighty. Let's jump into our primary topic and talk about same page preview. So let's get into a little bit of history, a little bit of the origin story here for same page preview. How did this module come to be, Chris?
Oh yeah. So I've been working on a number of builds where I'm working with stakeholders. They've got a team of content creators, and they want to test their way to making sure the content is working, and they don't know that preview exists in Drupal. So there have been times I've pointed out Drupal's preview feature, and Drupal 8 is actually really great. And I'm usually met with like concern and worry that it's almost too good. They are unsure if clicking the preview button, which is so close to the save button, has actually saved their content. And that's the reason why they're seeing it in high fidelity. So I have to go through a little bit of a training and walk them through. It's like, no, it's a preview. See this little artifact on the screen? It's not actually saved. So I've been thinking about it a long time. It's like, wouldn't it be great if we could do some kind of faster feedback loop of being able to edit a piece of content and being able to see the result of your actions. If the feedback loop was faster, maybe you'd have more comfort in how Drupal editing can sometimes be quite complicated. Lots of paragraphs, lots of different components. You can assemble a way to a page, and that can be overbearing if like your feedback loop is I've got to make all my changes, hit the save button, and then navigate to the page to see the change. If it was a lot faster, then you would be able to tinker your way to getting the content right. That was the kind of like the origin of the idea. And then I've been kind of noodling on that idea for a long time. And then Drupal Camp Florida happened. And then I showed up saying like, hey, I really want to do this idea. I will pay, I will give anyone who wants to help me this $100 bill that I was waving around. And a few people.
And it's not surprising that Brian Perry jumped at that opportunity.
He was one of them, yeah. Ofer was there too. And we kind of like noodled around a whiteboard and was just trying to see if the idea was impossible. Turns out Brian has worked on a module called Decoupled Preview, and a lot of the same ideas were needed from that one. We just needed to make sure that the refreshing happened more quickly and have the edit experience all in one page.
That's actually one of the things you mentioned preview. People don't really know that preview exists until they try decoupled, because decouple takes, especially back, a couple of years ago, decouple takes forever for the content creators to actually see their results live. And then previous job, we made our website decoupled, and the marketing people were constantly complaining, we don't know what's going on until 5 minutes later, and then we need to make a change, and that's another 5 minutes. And that's actually where the decoupled preview module came about. But then I was talking to the marketing people about, well, how did you preview the site before? And they're like, oh, we didn't. It was a quick change, so we could go back and edit and make another edit and make another edit, making multiple revisions. And then I was like, oh, that's why the database is so bloated, because of each revision that was going on. So this is a good thing to do for decoupled, as well as out of the box site in Drupal. So it's a module that I've been watching as well. So not helping on, but watching.
It's interesting because I always used to just tell people that preview in Drupal is notoriously bad because I felt like anytime you hit the preview button, it was like kind of like going into a casino and like pulling the crank on a slot machine because you never really knew what you were going to get. And most of the time people were like, well, this is what my page is going to look like. This is concerning. And it's like, no, well, it's not. It's going to kind of look like this, right?
Yeah.
So I could see great value for, what you're proposing here, right? And what the same page preview module does, where it has the exactly that same page preview, right? It's adding a preview essentially to the node page in kind of a split screen format. I think, the decoupled aspects of this are interesting as well, because I know, to Mark's point a while back, I think Gatsby was definitely doing kind of these rapid previews, but it's become a little bit easier now to do that previewing, but to be able to do it all in one place really makes a lot more sense.
Right, and hopefully avoid some of the associated costs with like clicking that button or taking that action that generates the new front end. Those aren't exactly free, and if you can get your answers quicker, that also has value. That having a really tight feedback loop on like I just did a thing and completely broke the page and how it looks like, I should not do that, and learn that about your system and maybe report that bug to your back-end development team.
So can you dive in a little bit and tell us exactly what same page preview does? Like we've kind of
happy to, yeah,
tiptoed about it a bit.
So same page preview just takes Drupal's preview functionality and throws it into an off-canvas dialog. That this technique of using the off-canvas dialog is what layout builder uses in order to create a little sidebar and a widget and a bunch of controls. We figured out we could throw a whole iframe into that. There was a recent version of Drupal, I think in the Drupal 9 era, that actually included an iframe element. But we figured out we could throw an iframe in there without using it. It's actually very simple. It was a lot simpler than we thought it was going to be. We just needed to figure out how to generate that preview on demand instead of utilizing Drupal's preview functionality, and then throw it into the iframe, and then figure out how we can add a bunch of buttons in there in order for a content creator to take control over the experience. And distilled in tight detail, that's what it is. The Ajax bits and writing the JavaScript were the most complicated parts.
So go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, so it's taking the content from the edit screen and putting it into the theme to show it rather than calling it from the database, right? Are there any complexities then with dealing with things like paragraphs or nested pieces or caching?
I suppose it'd be good to review a little bit how Drupal's preview system works. Drupal's preview system is just taking the form state of your edit page, and then it's got its own custom logic that takes that form state and renders whatever you're editing with your current Drupal theme. And so when it comes to answering questions like, well, what are we doing in order to support paragraphs or storage entities or anything that somebody creates in the future, they've needed to make it work with form state. And Drupal's preview system is just taking that form state and stamping out a rendered item. So we didn't have to do anything in order to make sure that same page preview also supported any kind of content structure you might throw at it, because in order for it to exist, you got to make it work with form state.
Now that you've said that, it's so obvious that Yeah, it's so obvious that that's how it works. I've never actually thought about how the preview functionality works, but yeah, makes sense.
That was quite an educational adventure to like walk through Node. Like, how many times do you walk through the Node module and see how the bits
Yeah.
of it work? The whole off canvas dialogue was pretty awesome to wrap your head around too, and all the recent work that has gone into making the CSS for that better, and how we had to avoid some common pitfalls. There's the whole off canvas dialogue is you find it in a number of different software tools, number of different CMSs, and they all do it a little bit differently. And Drupal's is still bound to jQuery's dialogue element. And so a lot of what Drupal is doing is passing parameters and variables to it. And the CSS that you have to avoid and work around is dictated by what jQuery is doing. And in the process, we figured out how to do all of it with just standard CSS. The only problem is that CSS isn't standard across all browsers yet. So waiting for that. I mentioned in my bio, I've got a very strong fear of missing out. And that comes when I learn about something cool like browser-only off-canvas dialogues. There's a couple of threads I'm following where it's like, if we could just get Safari on board, it'll be a thing.
It's interesting because my FOMO usually extends to pool parties, but we'll do that another time. So, I mentioned Brian Perry. You mentioned Offer. So who are some other maintainers of the same page preview module?
People who have provided considerable work. Brian, myself, Martin. Martin helped us quite a bit in figuring out how to do some of the advanced JavaScript portions of same page preview. We got much further, much faster than we thought we would, based upon his contributions. But as far as maintaining it over time, I think that mostly rests on me and anybody who's jumping into the preview channel on Drupal Slack.
And to be clear, you're not mailing all of those people $100 bills. That was a one-time occurrence, right?
You should track Brian and Ofer down. I have yet to pay $100 because it's like we all showed up at Twin Cities Drupal Camp recently, and he wouldn't accept the money, but still I love the idea of an incubator, the idea of a bunch of Drupal folks getting together, talk about like a wild idea that they might have and try to understand if is this actually a thing that could be done and how quickly can it be done? And just do it.
It's funny you said incubator, and I immediately thought nothing keeps people warm like $100 bills.
I really like that's what camps are for, is for people to get together in person. We could talk about this, over Zoom or over Slack or whatever, until we sit in the same room and say, okay, what do you really want to do? And be able to live board it, together. There nothing replaces actual human interaction. As hard as I try, nothing will replace actual human interaction.
I think an incubator is a great idea, and I think it might be the next step of something like Pittsburgh too, right? I think Pittsburgh, maybe the first couple of iterations of it, it makes more sense to have something that's a little bit further along. But I'm not then same page preview, but then it was, when it was your idea, right? Have something that's slightly provable and be like, hey, we need X amount of dollars to get across the finish line. I think that makes sense. But yeah, I think it'd be great in the future to just have a little bit more blue sky thinking to just put things together. Like somebody's, having some sort of user experience fix for Drupal core and just, having the funding to get a couple of people together to put that together. I think that's a great idea.
Didn't Brian Perry do something at Pittsburgh? And was it same page preview?
No. He's working on,
look at that guy.
He's working on an API client, which is very much needed in order to get front-end development teams on board with using Drupal as an API resource. A lot of teams, when they jump into using the API of some kind of product, there's a whole kit that they can just start using and then immediately start interacting with the APIs of the thing from a programmatic basis. And so in order to address that audience, Brian and the team are getting together to make sure that something like that exists and is easily discoverable.
So one point I think that's interesting there about incubators and getting people together at camps is a lot of camps have contribution days, right? And contribution isn't necessarily always to Drupal core. It can be contribution to modules and initiatives that help support Drupal as well, right? So I think contribution days are a good source of this collaboration as well. Shameless plug, NedCamp, New England Drupal Camp's happening in November, the 17th and 18th in Providence, Rhode Island, and they are having a contribution day. So if you would like to come and contribute and hang out with a bunch of cool Drupal folks, come on over to Providence, Rhode Island.
I'd love to go. And I should double check my calendar to see if I can.
There you go. The schedule just got posted.
Well, I wanted to go, but Lil is draining my travel budget. So, which, I'm going to go to Europe if, Providence is pretty far away, but not far enough.
Viva la France.
Viva la France.
You should bring us all back baguettes when you come back. Okay.
Yeah. So let's virtual baguette. Go ahead.
Oh, now I'm hungry. Let's talk about let's go back to talking about same page preview, and just talk about the current state of the module. Is it? I'm assuming it's Drupal 10 ready. Is that accurate, Chris?
It's more accurate to say it's Drupal 10 only. In fact, I released a patch this morning, the morning of our recording, to make it require Drupal 10.1. I did a Drupal talk recently at Twin Cities Drupal Camp that explains why we required 10.1. And if you get to the end of that talk, I just want to reiterate, I'm sorry.
Well, can you give us the Cliff Note version of that talk? Why does it require 10.1?
Well, I did mention the FOMO, fear of missing out, and I wanted to learn single directory components, and it requires single directory components now. It was a very good solution for the problem I was trying to solve. So it's actually a great example if you want to look at how could you implement a single directory component as a module instead of a theme. It's that requirement that makes me require 10.1 as a minimum requirement for using the module, and hopefully a reason for people to upgrade.
So now I gotta ask, because I'm thoroughly confused as to why preview requires single directory components. We're going down the rabbit hole, folks.
Yep.
That's what I do. I'm sorry, folks. So I wanted to implement a couple of controls in the preview that would allow people to control what kind of functionality they wanted to see. All of that was an attempt to address accessibility concerns that we listened to while previewing the functionality to the accessibility room in Drupal Slack. Sometimes people are overwhelmed with all the visual detail. And if you think about how a screen reader adapts to a constantly updating preview, you can see how you would need the ability to control the ability to avoid being overwhelmed by such an audible stimulus. And so I just couldn't figure out how to code that without single directory components, because I'm a backend developer. I've spent most of my time in PHP. I spent little time in JavaScript. So single directory components was the easiest and fastest route for me to solve the problem of how do I create these controls within the preview that had all this functionality.
Interesting. So it's basically like UI components that you're bringing in through single directory components.
Yeah, I needed buttons that, if you were to collapse them, didn't take over all of the horizontal space that was provided them. I wanted them to collapse down to an icon, and I needed a button that, when clicked, would offer a series of checkboxes that would allow you to toggle functionality off.
We can try to link that demo in the show notes for people to look at after if they're interested too.
Martin actually created a great demo that's on the module page. That would be a good one to go to.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things I'm curious about, whenever you're talking about preview, is how previews are handled smaller screens, right? So the edit screen in Drupal is already pretty crowded and kind of difficult to interact with, but if you're adding kind of an off-screen canvas, I imagine that's a little complicated too. Can you use this on mobile?
Absolutely. Yep. And again, I can't take credit for any of it because that's just how Drupal rolls. The off-canvas dialog that we utilize is the same one that Layout Manager utilized, and they needed to solve that problem. So we inherit everything that they solved. On a mobile device, if you've got the off-canvas dialog, it just takes over the whole screen. And so you can toggle between editing and then clicking the preview button, and then it opens the preview. That back and forth. They take turns in using your screen space.
Very cool. So that being said, for performance issues, is it an immediate? Do you have any lag issues? Do you find it like causing any memory errors or anything like that? What is performance like?
There hasn't been a strong need to profile this out to get concrete answers to what you're saying, Mark. But from just a usability perspective, just a like a common perspective, the updates happen on change of focus. So you're adding a new paragraph, you click to somewhere, another field on the screen, and then you'll see your change made. You type into a text editor, you toggle to another field, you'll see a change.
And that also brings around like accessibility performance. Like you had already mentioned it, but I wanted to reiterate that screen readers probably freak out when you change focus, and then all of a sudden it's got to read focus from someplace else showing the preview, and then go back to where you were. I imagine there's a lot of possibilities of where it could lose. It could get boxed into something that it doesn't, where the user gets lost if they're using something like that.
Yeah, we needed a smart off button. We needed the ability to both have the feature and not just be forced into taking the feature. So we wanted like a user by user ability to be able to opt out of the same page preview. And just because the modules within the mix of a site with multiple audiences, multiple stakeholders, to not be forced into being on the update parade of changes whenever you're trying to edit a thing.
I also wonder about the performance in general, like server side too, right? Drupal can be extremely performant, right? Especially for anonymous users. There's a lot of caching layers. It becomes more difficult to make Drupal a performance site the more people are logged in and have separate caches. And I think that's even more true when it comes to editing, right? If you have a site with a lot of editors, you're going to have to spend a lot of time making your site performant. There's a lot of strategies for that. But I'm curious, since you're kind of on the fly re-rendering without caching the site front end and back end for the user, do you think that this will impact higher editorial sites with more editors more than smaller sites? Like, is that something that you've even considered or looked at?
When I consider it, I fall into the trap of thinking, well, we're not really doing anything different than Drupal's previous system. This is a known problem rather than an additional problem that I'm adding into the mix of problems that sites have to deal with, and therefore maybe I don't think about it so much, and just be in the joy of creation. But when I do think about it, I think about it from the context of like my previous experience. As I said, I've been doing Drupal longer than my kids are old. The number of times I've been on a project where I've had more than 10 editors was zero.
This is rare. Yeah. I kind of want to challenge that comment that it's not doing anything different than preview, though, because I think there's one significant change, and that is when you're previewing as an editor in the current system, you're manually clicking a button, you preview, then you go back. So like the amount of renders that are happening there is kind of limited because you're a human interacting with it versus a same page preview. If I'm editing a few things on the page, say I edit a taxonomy term, edit a title somewhere, edit the title of the page and something else, like 4 or 5 things, I'm not going to look at the preview. I may not look at the preview until I'm done with that, but each of those actions is going to cause a re-render. So the number of renders happening are potentially significantly higher. And like I said, this is probably very much an edge case of an edge case, but it might be something we're thinking about because this type of system, I think one of the really cool things about this is people are going to start using preview.
Yeah.
Like I don't use preview. So I think it's going to become a wider issue because number one, more people are using preview in more situations. And two, the scale of those re-renders are much higher. So the threshold for that becoming an issue, I think, is going to be lower. I think it's still worth pursuing. I was just curious if that's something you've seen.
You've changed it from avoid preview like the plague to maybe I'll give it a try.
You're right. We didn't add a new system that is a bad citizen within the Drupal ecosystem and doing malicious things to the performance of the site. But we are allowing users to utilize this preview system much more than they previously would. And therefore, perhaps there are some performance considerations that weren't considered because it was kind of like an underutilized system. All that said, I have yet to receive any complaints about the performance of the module, but that largely goes into how utilized it is, which is to say, our requirement of needing Drupal 10.1 means it's not really used a lot by a lot of folks. I suspect there's a ton of folks that don't even know it exists.
Hence coming onto a podcast.
Here we go.
A lot more people are going to know it exists after this. When we're talking about performance, like caching comes to mind, but I'm thinking that there isn't an impact on caching and caching those previewed versions of the page here because you are so tightly coupled to Drupal's already existing preview system. Is that accurate, or did you guys have to kind of factor in like, oh, don't cache this preview of the content since it's not actually published content or saved content yet?
Yeah, I don't think we gave caching much concern because this is kind of inherently uncacheable kind of data. We want as little caching here as possible. If it's any caching, it's like all the thing that would wrap the main content area where we're just seeing rapid change. And again, we are inheriting a lot of the decisions made within the preview system. So we looked at that and said, maybe sometime we'll think about that.
Yeah, caching would be an issue when using like reusable blocks, and then you have to make sure that you're getting the latest version of that reused block. If that's part of your page, I would imagine that would kind of be the only place that it comes in my mind.
I would imagine that becomes a responsibility of the render API and its ability to maintain its cacheability data. and it's almost better to not intervene.
I think you could break stuff with caching with this system, but if you are, you're already doing things that you really shouldn't be doing with the caching layer anyway.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of very much a unsupported use case type thing.
Our key goal above all else in building this was to use as much of core Drupal as possible. We did not want to add things where we could add things. My little adventure in these buttons were probably a violation of that core tenet. But hey, I'm using single directory components, which is an experimental module in Drupal. I didn't require another bit that Drupal isn't providing.
Have no fear. By the time everybody gets to 10.5, it'll be a fond memory.
Yeah, I think single directory components is going to make it all the way into core, no problem. People are very, very excited about it.
I'm a huge fan.
Speaking of getting into core, the module page has a huge banner that says "Coming soon to Drupal core?" ? I'm curious about, are you planning on getting into core? Are there talks on that? Like, what's the update there?
So we, at the very beginning of this idea, saw the potential of bringing this whole idea into core, no matter what final form it keeps. And in the process, we've reached out to a lot of core developers to get their idea. Is this something that could possibly get into core? We're working through the process. This is the first time I've ever tried to get anything into core. I'm a little intimidated by the process, but there's a lot of folks like Bohr and a lot of the folks that I've reached out to in like the Slack channels that are very receptive to the idea. We just need to see how it fits with everything else that's going on, and I don't have a good vision on everything else that's going on. Wouldn't it be great if this was like in Drupal and this was like your definition of what Drupal is from the very beginning? Wouldn't that be great?
I mean, so I'm trying to think now because, I like to put my devil's advocate hat on. I'm just trying to think, like, why wouldn't we want this in core? I think at the beginning of the show, we all kind of highlighted our distrust, for lack of a better word, of the Drupal preview system as is currently, right? So if we could develop this better preview and bring it into core, I'm trying to figure out why we wouldn't, but maybe one of you has a better reason.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that people go to other platforms is because Drupal's, doesn't really have a good preview system, or it doesn't have that whole Gutenberg experience and stuff like that, where you're actually seeing, it's an actual WYSIWYG. You are actually going to see what you're going to get. And that's where the preview is very much lacking. And this would definitely help move that into something that's more content editor friendly, which, is basically why people opt to other systems. And I think that would help also. Now, it would be nice for people like who don't care about that, who have the mindset of, oh, there's a preview, to be able to disable that. So it's not something that's running constantly that they're not going to use.
Sure.
But that should be a mod. That's a core module that you turn on or turn off. Have you tried turning it off and on again? So I think that would be a good thing for it to be into core. And I am actually real curious about that process myself. And I would love to hear more of how that goes on. So, not that I'm in charge or anything, but maybe have you come on later and talk about that process, how that's going.
Totally. Code-wise, we're overriding, we're extending a number of things that already exist in core, and we're just sprinkling in our extra bits.
And I think that would make it easier since you're already using core,
right.
Core stuff, and unless, of course, that core stuff decides to get deprecated all of a sudden on you, and then you've got to struggle. But usually, when it's deprecated, it gives you another answer. So, that being said, what do you think is the roadmap? What do you think is going to be next? What's the next big feature that you're trying to add to this?
From the beginning, we talked about same page preview as being implemented in 3 phases. The first phase was, can you even put preview on page? And we got there pretty quickly. We got there pretty much like a week after camp got done. And then the second phase was, can you see the changes rapidly? Maybe not immediate, maybe not as soon as you're typing, but as soon as we possibly could. And Martin helped us a ton to get there. We were there. We were able to see like almost near immediate changes in the preview. And the final phase was our stretch goal, trying to get it working in decoupled contexts. You know, Brian's experience with decoupled preview made us think that was possible. What if the preview pane, which is just an iframe after all, allowed you to dictate what URL you want to see a preview of? And recently we've been talking about how to get there, because all we need to do is make sure that the signal gets sent on out to your decoupled platform. Let's say it's Next.js, that new content is available, and then have it do its thing to go fetch and build all that, and then you'll see your preview. They give you a whole like preview URL that you can use in order to see previews with that specifically that platform. Gatsby.js also gives you a preview URL, and so
Okay.
we think we're going to get there before the year is out.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And stepping back for 1 second, just to the core question, just as a counterpoint, I
Sure.
think, because we've had a number of core subsystem maintainers on, and that one of the things that they talk about is who's going to maintain it, right? I think the only reasons the things don't get into core usually is they're really complex. They add additional dependencies, and they don't really move the project as a whole forward in Drupal, right? And personally, I don't see any of those impacting here, unless as more people adopt it, we find out there's some major performance issue for some reason once people start utilizing this more. Like John was saying with disabling previews, like I haven't had previews enabled for clients in probably 10 years, like period. And this is the first time I've thought about using it. And really the only 2 reasons I would see not using it is, one, if there's some sort of major performance issue, or it just interacts poorly with some system. But like you said, if you're just kind of rendering the front end just with different data, I don't see that being an issue. I don't see that being a problem. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of give that counterpoint to the core. Getting something into core is a big hurdle for a good reason. It's going to take a lot of work, but I personally don't see any of those major blockers that a lot of things usually have. A lot of things that people think should be in core, they're just really, really niche or really complex code wise. I mean, I looked through the code base. There's not a lot there. Because like you said,
you look in Contribland and you see people trying to address the how do I approach this as a human being? How do I wrap my head around some of the complexity that some Drupal sites can grow to be? And there's a market for that kind of solution to help both backend developers, content creators, regular human beings to wrap their head around the complexity of what could be. And it's a fine point, but Drupal 8 was released about 8 years ago. And when it released, it had this preview system. 8 years ago, we could have had this feature. There's nothing special about what we're doing here that couldn't have been done 8 years ago. And
so on.
Well, the settings tray stuff didn't exist, right? So that you're leveraging
the
settings tray, the off canvas stuff. I don't think that existed at the time. But
that was my little flourish. That was me not being able to control my fear of missing out and trying to put the fancy thing in there. That's what we could do today. But phase 1 of getting the preview on the page, we did with nothing special. Just really? Put another button on the page and click that button, and then you see the preview on the same page as your edit. That was done with nothing but core Drupal, and that could have been done 8 years ago.
Wow, That's fascinating.
And remember, if there's a big problem with performance, all you really have to do is throw Wim Lears at it, and he'll take care of it.
I'm sure Wim's happy to hear that.
So this could have been done 8 years ago, but it takes people to see a need, and then for you to give them $100 at a Drupal camp to step up and fill the need. If people are listening to this podcast and they're like, wow, I want to get involved with the same page preview module, how can they go about doing that?
We're in the preview channel on Drupal Slack. You can feel free to jump into our issue queue. We've had a couple of recent great issues that we're starting to tackle right now. Use it. Use the module and listen to your users. Report all that feedback and help make it better. That's probably the best thing.
I'd like to dig into that process a little bit more, actually, because you said you started this at Drupal, Florida Drupal Camp, which was, when was that?
February.
That was February?
February, yeah.
What has that process looked like? So obviously at the Drupal Camp, you said I assume you kind of just got in a room with Brian and Offer and kind of hashed out some stuff. And then about a week later, you kind of hashed out some other stuff. But has all the collaboration just been, those little meetings in, the issue queue and Slack, or is there another way that you've been kind of driving this? Any other tools or tips for people?
For me, that's the coolest bit. And thank you for that lead in, Nick. 'Cause that's the entire focus of my my Twin Cities Drupal Camp talk. You guys are able to find that. It's out there on YouTube now, talking about how the sausage was made. But the Cliff Notes is basically the Slack channel was huge in connecting everybody around the idea. We were trying to put ourselves into 2-week sprints, see how much we can get done with 2 sprints. And in the meantime, we used a tool called Loom to create demo videos to demonstrate where progress was. That high fidelity kind of like status report of creating a little screen shared demo and sharing it with the team was instrumental in making sure that everybody was on the same page on like where we were and what needs to be done, what problems we're facing, all that.
Okay, very cool.
Very interesting. I would like to end with a listener question from Stephen, who is jumping in the Wayback Machine here. We're going back 10 plus years ago. And he recalled connecting with you, or maybe that you were hosting a Google Plus, whoever remembers that, Google way back when.
Right.
Drupal Coffee, right? You started that, and that's actually right around when he started talking Drupal. Was like, hey, let's jump on this Google Plus, and that may have been a catalyst, I think, is what he's getting at.
That's some good feels, man. People who know me well know me. I'm like all in on the Android ecosystem. When Google Plus came out, I was probably the only person that I know that was excited about it. And there were a number of Drupal communities that sprung up as soon as that group feature was available, and I kind of figured out how to get everyone to work together instead of create their own cloistered communities. We had one giant Drupal community out there until they shut it down, and that was great for a period of time. And I should amend what you said. I am not the author of the coffee module in Drupal. That's a fantastic module. I wish I thought of it. I had a podcast kind of called Drupal and Coffee, where I would get together with another developer and just hack. We would just hack for about 2 hours on an idea. And for a time, we were making a website for a local school. That was kind of fun. And I just got to my physical limit. I couldn't do it. But every now and then I think about coming back and trying to do something. My buddy JD does dev. He's on Twitch. And I've been thinking about doing something like that every now and then. But
yeah, I was going to say that would be an interesting Twitch to do. Just, like a morning coffee talking about a module kind of thing. My Twitter handle is Drunken Drupal, so I'm thinking more towards the evening where whiskey, Drupal and scotch or something like that. But whatever.
Maybe you guys could team up and just do like a drinking Drupal Twitch stream where one of you takes the morning coffee and one of you takes the afternoon beers or drinks.
I love the idea of like ping pong Drupal development where one person is hacking on a thing and it's trying to collectively tell a story where one person starts telling a story and then another person like goes completely off the reservation.
What was that thing that I think Adobe used to do with design, where it was just that, like one design, they would put two designers against each other and one would start off with an idea and then they would send the file back and forth to each other and everybody, like each person would make a modification to the file. What was that?
Sounds like gold, Mark.
Yeah.
Man, this feels like we could revitalize this, bring it back. Anyway, that was a fun walk down memory lane.
John, if I may,
for a few minutes. Go ahead.
We talked about you plugged camp earlier. I have a small plug here in the Twin Cities. We're going to try to do a little bit of that incubator idea. We're getting together for a hack night. We're going to try to do it on a monthly basis. It's coming up next week. We're going to host it at my company, Nerdery, and we're going to be getting together. We're trying to bring stakeholders and developers together to try to talk about like what kind of wild idea do you have, and what can we hack within the 2 or 3 hours that we've got? How far can we get with the idea?
It's clever. It's cool.
So maybe we could throw little bits like that. My company used to do this thing called Overnight Website Challenge, which sounds completely insane. Making a website in 24 hours for a local nonprofit. I did that 8 times. It is the most thrilling, stressful, and rewarding thing I've ever done. But I physically can't do that anymore, but maybe I could do it for 3 hours.
Yeah, no, and by the way, that was the first time you were on the show to talk about that, the overnight.
Oh yeah,
that was episode 48 for the people that want to go way back and check that out.
Well, Chris, as always, thank you for joining us. It was great to hear more about Same Page Preview.
Thank you so much for having me.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on the social network formerly known as Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email at show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on Drupal Slack and the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/tdpromo.
And you can get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest host show news, upcoming Drupal camps, local meetups, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. Learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and choosing that Become a Patron button in the sidebar. All right, we've reached the end of our show. Chris, if folks wanted to get a hold of you and talk about Same Page Preview or FOMO, where could they do that?
I'm in the Drupal Slack. Reach out to me. My Drupal username is Cosmic Dreams. Happy to talk about Drupal. It's my second favorite thing to talk about.
And there you go. Mark, what about you?
I'm on Drupal Slack. I'm Marky on Drupal.org and in Drupal Slack. Like I said, if you're on the X thing, I'm Drunken Drupal there. Or Team Poop if you want to be less professional. I don't know which is less professional, but and also I'm on Mastodon on Marky. And by saying I'm on Mastodon, that means I've signed up for it and haven't looked at it since. So you got all those options.
There you go. If only there were a service that kind of like federated all the social networks into one place. Anyway, Nick,
was allowed to. Because they keep switching them on and off.
Nick, what about you? Where can folks find you?
You can find me pretty much everywhere at NextVan, NICXVAN, and the Talking Drupal channel is probably the best place to reach me.
And there you go. I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks as well as Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out more about EPAM at epam.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Thanks
for
everyone.
playing.